Hello and welcome to the Synonym Spaces. Today I'm joined by two amazing speakers. So first of all, we have Synonym CEO John Cavallo. In case you don't know what Synonym is, it's a Bitcoin company that is developing and bootstrapping a full ecosystem of software products and protocols necessary to operate in a post-hyper-Bitcoinization environment. And our second speaker in the space today is none other than BullBitcoin CEO and founder Francis Pouliot. BullBitcoin is a non-custodial Bitcoin exchange and payment service. Their mission is to empower Canadians to take back control over their money. And today's topic, we're going to talk about Bitcoin maximalism, which, in case you will not know, probably all of you know, but Investopedia defines it as Bitcoin maximalists believe that Bitcoin, which is the most popular current cryptocurrency, is the only digital asset that will be needed in the future. Maximalists believe that all other digital currencies are inferior to Bitcoin. Okay, but let's move on to the questions for today. First question, Francis and John, please say hello to our listeners and tell us how would you define maximalism. Let's start with Francis.
Hey, everyone. That seems to be the descriptive maximalism definition. I am a prescriptive Bitcoin maximalist, which means I believe that Bitcoin maximalism, what it means to me, is to believe that only one currency should exist in the world, and that therefore all other currencies must be destroyed. And consequently, Bitcoin, being the best contender, Bitcoin will succeed as being the dominant money. So I don't believe it's just an observation that economically, socially, Bitcoin is the most likely currency to dominate, and then the others will wither away. I believe that we should actively work towards this objective.
John, how about yourself?
Well, I will not necessarily disagree with anything you said. I look at it a little bit differently, where I'd say that, I see Bitcoin maximalism as simply respecting how Bitcoin actually works. And so, particularly in the context of blockchains and such, if you understand how proof of work behaves, what the design of the Bitcoin blockchain does, you just automatically can, rationalize that every other blockchain is just basically superfluous. It's a counterfeit, reproduction. And you can't believe in the concept of Bitcoin being a store of value and being a better way to do money, or just store of value in the abstract, and also believe that you can keep adding more and more shitcoins. The logic does not follow. You have to make leaps of morals, leaps of logic. You have to believe things that do not coincide, do not rationalize together in order to believe that there's also room for additional blockchains. And so I didn't quite maybe say it in the way that Francis portrayed in the context of currency and money and things like this, because I try to look at things in this kind of first principles way. But he's not wrong either. I'm not going to predict the future and say when all of that will happen. But if we're right about Bitcoin, it is theoretically inevitable that we're going to end up only with Bitcoin, at least as the primary store of value. As far as whether or not we can kill every currency anytime soon, I don't know, but it's worth a try.
All right, before killing all sorts of currencies, let's kind of move on to second question. What is your observation of how, kind of looking back into the past, how did Bitcoin maximalism kind of came about? How was it born? And would you even kind of consider maybe Satoshi Nakamoto himself? Was he a maximalist or maybe even a toxic maximalist? How about John goes first on this question?
So I think Satoshi was supportive of Namecoin, and I'm going to guess maybe other early, ideas of how to use Bitcoin or make additional blockchains. So I don't know that I would call him a strict toxic maximalist. The concept didn't even exist back then. But if you look at the evidence, he's never moved his Bitcoins. And so if anybody is a hodler, and assuming he's not dead, then nobody is a harder hodler than, Satoshi. As far as where the concept originated, I kind of recall it being maybe kind of a two-part thing where on one hand, mostly Vitalik Buterin is credited with coining the term. I think it was like an article that he wrote at some point, but the term was just a word that was basically used to describe some early behaviors of early Bitcoin maximalists. And it was originally created as like a derogatory concept. It was meant to say like, these people are wrong, these people are bad, and they didn't have the word toxic yet, but essentially that was the goal, was to make people that like were staunch Bitcoiners and idealists of Bitcoin being this one true or one best currency, that these people were not logical, not rational, emotional, religious, etc. But in my estimation, I was around when this was happening, and I actually think it was a direct reaction to Mircea Popescu and the people that he was associated with, the people that would hang out, basically the clique of Bitcoiners that were really severe about what Bitcoin meant and how in the design of it. And they were toxic, and I was part of that group. And yeah, it was not the friendliest environment, but it was hardcore learning. And the things I learned from those people in those days and from Mircea, like they stick with me today. And I try to teach people some of those things to this day, and it's still difficult. So I think, I don't know if I'm accurate about all of these things. I haven't like done the formal research, but this is how I remember it, at least, that it was kind of this two-part thing where you had some early Bitcoiners that were really pushing to say like, this is the real deal, everything else is fake and crap and scams. And then you had, Vitalik Buterin like birthing shitcoiner, culture. Because there were shitcoins before him, but he was the one that kind of made it a whole, industry. And so I think that he was trying to immediately position against Bitcoin. And, that's all shitcoiners do, is they try to show a narrative about why you should consider them instead of Bitcoin. They're nothing without Bitcoin. Sorry for the rant, but yeah, that's how I remember it.
It's awesome. Now we're looking forward to Francis' rant. What's your observation? Was Bitcoin maximalism was born, and was Satoshi even a maximalist in your view? I think John, while Francis kind of tries to rejoin, how about you explain a little bit more to kind of like people newer to the space? Who is Popescu?
Yeah, Mircea Popescu.
Mircea Popescu, sorry.
I might be saying it partially wrong too, but yeah, I guess that's a good question. He is a Romanian that was pretty early into Bitcoin, and he is a very eccentric, very crude, and a lot of people would say generally a horrible person. But he was also very, very intelligent, and he was one of the people to really grasp in a first principles sort of way Bitcoin very, very early. And so he was one of, I would personally refer to him as like, the father of Bitcoin maximalism, grandfather, however you make these terms, because he was the first one to really, be 100% confident in all of these things. There was no doubt with him, everything was just totally true, and there was you couldn't shake him. And he really understood a lot of things that other people would equivocate on, and have lower confidence in, as far as like dynamics of Bitcoin, how it would play out, and how the relationships it had with other blockchains that people would try to make, other currencies, what it would do to the system, things like this, what you could and couldn't do with it safely, lend, like you can't lend. He had these concepts like it's impossible to lend Bitcoin because it's a bearer instrument, and so you never want to lend Bitcoin.
So while we wait for Francis, John, kind of like tell us something exciting that's happening right now at Synonym.
Hold on. Well, right now we're trying to prepare for these upcoming conferences in the fall, and we're trying to figure out a roadmap for what exactly we will announce and launch, and if we have enough time to do it. And so there's been a lot of, bike shedding and a lot of road mapping and a lot of debate as to like what priorities will be, and this just, we're all working really hard. But yeah, we're trying to figure out when exactly we will announce the wallet and what exact features will be ready by then. And yeah, it's tricky. We have some new features and products that we want to release or at least announce later in the year. And we also are polishing up a /tags SDK, which will be pretty cool because it will give people a lot easier way to both understand and see it demonstrated and start applying it.
All right. While we wait for Francis, let me kind of pull somebody up on the stage. Maybe he has a question for John.
Yeah, let's do that.
Bitcoin Lake, you're on stage. Do you have a question?
Yes, hi. My name is Rishi Bond, and I'm the founder of Bitcoin Lake in Guatemala, and we're implementing a circular economy. And I had a question for John. First of all, John, really nice to meet you. I applaud the first time that I found out about you when you had that interview with Roger Ver back in 2017, which went absolutely viral, and it was so epic. And it was my first exposure to someone who really had such a passionate and firm belief that Bitcoin was the way and the only way. And my question for you specifically is, since we're implementing this circular economy, we're getting a lot of people that are enticed by shitcoins. What recommendation would you have for us to either create content in Spanish specifically to remind them that all of them are a scam, 100% of them, and that they need to stick to Bitcoin only? Thank you.
Sure. So, obviously this is an unsolved problem. So no matter what I tell you as advice, it has not worked, right? There's still plenty of people in love with shitcoinery and in love with whether it be because of gambling or believing that it's actually a better Bitcoin, or that Bitcoin is too a dinosaur and not keeping up with the times, whatever the reason is. So far, any narrative that we've come up with and any approach that we've attempted has not worked, right? And so all I can do is give you my best shot at maybe what would work if people believed it, or if we were better at communicating it. And I think maybe one big one would be that you can show them. We have a lot of history. You can show them every time that Bitcoin goes up, there's a new batch of scams that emerge that pump and dump. And then when the cycles of Bitcoin, subside, these things are left dead. They fall, 95, 99% in value, and they never get out of that rut again. This is maybe 80% of the coins, maybe even more. And we had the ICO craze, we had DeFi, we had NFTs, we have Web3 now. All of these things are just narratives. And the truth of it is that, and I don't know how you can convince them, because it's hard to separate greed from, rationality. And when these people, once they buy this shitcoin, they feel stuck to it. They will lie to themselves and everybody around them to justify the behavior and justify their choice, because they don't have enough certainty or understanding deeply what's actually possible, and how it actually works. And so you can show them evidence. You can say, you are, the third, fourth wave of people believing what you believe. Nothing you are doing is new. Everything you are believing in, somebody believed before you and got wrecked. This is what you can convey to them. And then maybe they'll throw at you how Ethereum is still surviving. And then you show them the Ethereum BTC chart and you explain to them what they're looking at. This is what the price is in Bitcoin. And you can show them how Ethereum did not reach its all-time high in Bitcoin in this most recent bull run. And that's, a pretty good evolution and pretty good evidence that it may never happen. And so the hardest lesson to learn, even for myself, took me a long time, is that all you ever had to do with Bitcoin was nothing. All you ever had to do was just accumulate as much as you could and only put in the money that you could afford to hold long term, so you aren't forced to sell during a bear market because you need to pay your rent. Just save in Bitcoin and do nothing with it. Don't trade it. Don't leverage it. Don't let people borrow it. Don't lend it and get an APR on it. Don't put it to work, as people will try to convince you to do. Don't use it as collateral to trade shitcoins. Like, just sit on it, because the truth is, most people, 80 to 95% of people, if you ask them, if they had done nothing at the point from the point where they had the most Bitcoin, if they have more, I'm phrasing the question incorrect, the answer incorrectly. If you had done nothing, from when you first, put everything into Bitcoin till today, after you tried trading, after you tried investing, after you doubted, do you have more Bitcoin today than then? And almost everybody will tell you no, that they would have had more Bitcoin if they hadn't fucked around with it. And so I don't know if that helps or if that's a good way to, convince these people, because it's difficult, but that's at least a rant about the topic.
John, tell us a little bit about your journey into Bitcoin maximalism. How do you get there? Were you always considering other coins, or Bitcoin was always the one thing for you?
I would say I kind of started to cover this indirectly in some of the other answers, but obviously I definitely first came into the values of it through the Bitcoin Assets crew, they were called, in IRC, with Mircea Popescu and Kako Brekla and some of these other guys. But I never really had doubt, or I should say, I never really believed in any of the other coins. That was never a thing like that. I was lucky to avoid that. But I did, hey, he's back. All right.
So there's a weird fucking glitch where internet is grade A. This is definitely a Twitter Spaces bug. So can you guys hear me?
If you're
Okay.
speaker.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so Francis, your question was kind of like, let's jump back into the agenda.
Yeah.
What's your observation of how Bitcoin maximalism was born, and was Satoshi even a maximalist? Or if you want to talk about something else before we lose you again, absolutely fine.
I don't think Satoshi was specifically when Satoshi created Bitcoin, it was the only cryptocurrency in a very technical sense. I guess he was a maximalist because there was no other cryptocurrency to believe in. I think John mentioned Namecoin. Satoshi was not perfect. Let's just say that. The origins of Bitcoin maximalism. I mean, a lot of people are just naturally inherently maximalist, and they don't necessarily need to read blog posts or compelling cases to believe in maximalism. The idea of only one money, only one monetary protocol, being the inevitable result of currency competition and being a good thing, has existed with gold maximalists before. So the transition to Bitcoin maximalism is not a huge intellectual leap. And as John mentioned, my earliest memory of Bitcoin maximalism, I mean, I was always a Bitcoin maximalist. I did not go through, a lot of people say, oh, I went through a shitcoining phase and so on. So I never went through the shitcoining phase. Thank the Lord. That is largely due to the influence of Mircea Popescu. I was not one of the direct readers of Mircea. I actually realized only later on just how much I had been influenced by Mircea. Me and Pete Rizzo actually had a chat about this, about just like how Mircea's influence was mimetically transmitted. Like I was like a third-hand Mircea follower, because the guys at the Bitcoin Embassy who founded the Bitcoin Embassy were huge followers of Mircea. And when I got into Bitcoin, I was told right away by the Bitcoin Embassy guys, it's like, it's Bitcoin only. We're Bitcoin.
Lost you, Francis.
All right, let's kind of like move on to the third question, why kind of Francis tries to reconnect again. And I think it's very, very similar to that one. I think you guys mentioned Mersha already, but who are some of the early maximalists, and which events really in Bitcoin history made the rise of maximalism, and what is maximalism today?
So, I mean, as far as who, I think, yeah, we've beat that one to death at this point. Like, as far as the first who, there was obviously a crew of other people that were supportive of the concepts, and I'm not going to name them, partly because people were a little more private back then, and they probably would prefer I didn't. And so, I would say the next moment maybe was. There must have been something before the Segwit 2X battles and all that stuff. Like, I guess you could kind of say like some of this was like one of the Maximus ideals was not to leave your money on exchange and don't trust exchanges and hold your own keys. Before we had memes, not your keys, not your coins. This was already a concept, and so the Mount Gox episode was actually a big like learning moment where people like us were dunking on people because we did not get goxed. We saw what was happening. We said no fucking way. We don't want a part of it, and we did not have our bitcoins on gox. And so there was a whole crew of bitcoiners that didn't get rug pulled. Rug pull didn't exist as a concept back then either. And then you had people trying to like trade the debt of Gox, this Bitcoin builder thing that existed. And so I think maybe that was kind of a moment, was the Goxing and Gox closing that kind of minted some maximalists and kind of proved some of the values. Are you back, Francis? This sucks. Sorry, guys. But I will do my best to hold up my weight. And I don't think it would have been nice to have Francis here because he's got another perspective on it than me. But yeah, so the Gox thing, that was maybe a time where we were kind of starting to get proven, and that's really the biggest thing with maximalism is the more time passes, the more we just keep being right. And it's like it's not even like an arrogance thing. It's just like you just get, after it happens a few cycles and you keep seeing the same things repeating, you become a toxic maximalist, and you're just like, fuck, man, like just I have no tolerance for this anymore. And so you get the latest crew of noobs thinking, I'm new to Bitcoin and I'm here to fix it, and this shitcoin is the real deal, and it's going to be the one that takes over everything, and it's got the faster transactions and higher throughput. And it's like, man, like you don't have no clue like how many people said this before you and are wrecked now. But yeah, so another moment, I guess might as well skip to the Segwit 2X time. That was really the probably biggest first defining moment. And the New York agreement and all of these kinds of things that happened. Like I remember the moment like that Barry Silbert like posted the New York agreement and the blog post and all this stuff on Twitter, and I just reading it and immediately ripping into him, and like he just was like, he was trying to respond, and then he's just like, I'm taking a break from Twitter for a little while, and he just like disappeared. And then I was like, and then it just kept like, this seemed like such an easy thing that like to maximalists, that we just had to shut this down and just have no tolerance for it. And so I was like, this is my first time trying to like participate in the Bitcoin dev mailing list, because there was like conversation about it there, and like people were starting to equivocate and show doubt. And I was just like, no fucking way. Like, and I remember in private, I think it was BTC Drac. I don't know if he's still around, but he was telling me about that. This was going to happen, and that there was going to be like a compromise where it's like we would give them the 2 megabyte block size hard fork if they would give us SegWit. And I was thinking, what's going to happen, man? We're going to get SegWit, and then we're not going to hard fork, and then they're going to be mad. And it's basically exactly what happened. And that was when I did the Roger Ver interview and the Vinny Lingam interview, and it was really just a really good confidence building moment for Bitcoin maximalism to really just be proven right again, And I think we're proven right every cycle. We're proven right every time a rug pull happens, every time a shitcoin dies, every time Vitalik doesn't ship ETH 2.0 and suckers more people. Like we just keep getting proven right, and we keep being told that we're toxic and that we're, dinosaurs and whatever other bullshit they say.
Francis, do we have you back or?
We do have me back. We do have me back. I think we left off at the fork wars. I see John has picked up the conversation. So yes, the fork wars I think was the catalyst in understanding that the shitcoins are not just like stupid experiments that are going to go away, even though they are also attacks on Bitcoin and attacks on potential Bitcoiners. The objective of the shitcoin is to divert the no coiners and potential Bitcoiners away from Bitcoin. So they do have a lot of collateral damage on the innocent, and they're not just a harmless kind of joke. Hence the holy mission to destroy them, because they're not necessary. There is no need to have market discovery. There is no need to have currency competition and figure out through experimentation which one is the superior one. When you talk about evolution and natural selection, that requires the deaths of billions and billions and billions and billions of beings. This experimentation is costly. We progress through the death of the competitors, right? At this point, I think we have figured it out. I think we have figured out that some kind of sound money, proof of work based money, basically the characteristics of Bitcoin are the characteristics of perfect money, and that we have this perfect money. And the way that I see the ongoing currency competition is just needless slaughter. We should stop the experiment and just declare Bitcoin the winner. That's the way that I see it. So the fork wars kind of bring out this malevolent element to the shitcoinery, which is that they're attacking the light, they're attacking the redeemer, Bitcoin, and that turns us into radicals. That turns us into anti-shitcoiners instead of just being extremely pro-Bitcoiners. And John, were you in Amsterdam in early 2018 at the Breaking or Building on Bitcoin conference? I believe you were.
Yeah, I think I was at that one.
Right. So just leading up to that one, right after, so we've won the fork wars, in like late 2017, and then we're on a high of success and a high of, there's like a new era of like lightning's coming, and all of these cool technologies are being developed, and the run your own node narrative is now kind of like not mainstream, but I mean it's in the zeitgeist of Bitcoiners. So we're kind of on a high there, and I guess a lot of us were being reeling from the war, being like, all right, like never again. And I remember there was specifically a lot of discussion about just how accepting the Bitcoin community was, where for new developers, right? So there had started to become this like meme that the Bitcoin community was not friendly to new developers, and that Ethereum actually is going to win against Bitcoin because they're way more friendly and inclusive, and they have all these outreach programs, including for women. And I don't know if you remember, John, I believe that the toxic part of the toxic maximalism was actually this journalist, Leg Kuhn or something. Can't remember. I was blogged by her.
Leg Kuhn or something, yes.
Yes, I was blogged by her about 5 years ago. And then she had started to like this kind of a complaining meme on Twitter that the Bitcoin maximalists were too toxic. They were creating a toxic environment that was preventing, women such as herself, and has called them, feeble male developers or betas really to fit in. And we started to make fun of that, and Kevin Lanek, the organizer of the conference, actually made the official T-shirt of the conference, like write Bitcoin Maximalist. I remember I made my own Bitcoin Maximalist T-shirt and brought it. A few people did. I think Rodolfo also, and I think like Samson had done this like Disney hat, like Bitcoin toxic maximalist. And then everybody kind of shows up at this conference, and then the word toxic is coming up, so much that we decide to embrace it. I decided to embrace it fully. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm toxic, you know? So there was a kind of social justice warrior element. So it started out as like very arcane, like chat rooms with Mirsha and this kind of very intuitive feeling that we must, and I think it was also a kind of like we must protect our bag kind of feeling in the very beginning. It was like, you know, this is our clan, this is our tribe, we must protect it. And then there was the shitcoiners rising. Fucking shite. Am I? Oh wait, am I still here?
I hear you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, okay, awesome. And then it graduated to like this fork war, shitcoinery kind of thing, and then it took on a little kind of like social justice warrior element to it as well. So you know, keeping Bitcoin pure, I guess, keeping the ethos of Bitcoin pure. And what was also interesting to me was that the maximalist and cypherpunk ideologies, they didn't fully mix because there are some cypherpunks that are shitcoiners, you know, some of the Monero people, which Monero is the worst shitcoin of all. Some of the Monero people are cypherpunks, you know, I'll grant them that. They're very cool cypherpunks in their own way. But generally speaking, there was also this kind of like merge of the cypherpunk and maximalist general ethos, where that is kind of now the Bitcoiner value set, where that is also kind of linked. I think Bitcoin maximalism is not exactly linked also to Bitcoin self-custody. But you know, if you're a Bitcoin maximalist, I believe you're probably likelier than a shitcoiner to understand and promote the concept of self-custody. And now Bitcoin maximalism is the mainstream narrative. I would say it's just fully become an accepted narrative. And I honestly believe that that is one of my greatest narrative legacies in Bitcoin. I mean, on the rise of Bitcoin maximalism in 2017, 2018, through this toxic rejection of compromise, was very appealing to a lot of the new Bitcoiners that now became huge contributors to the ecosystem. If anyone's familiar with my, or just generally the concept of the remnant, that's taken from the essay Isaiah's Job, which was recommended to me by Goldstein, which is one of the, you know, I guess, intellectual godfathers of Bitcoin maximalism, because Goldstein and Rochar, remember, in 2014, were taking a lot of the zeitgeist from Mirsha Popescu's group and writing it down into what became the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, sorry, the Nakamoto Institute blog and collection of blogs. So the remnant ideology of like no compromise. I will not tell you what you want to hear. I will not tell you that it's okay to shitcoin a little bit. Don't feel bad too much if you shitcoin. No, feel bad if you shitcoin. Ask for forgiveness, seek redemption, and convert to the one true faith. So that's how I see the rise of like the history of Bitcoin maximalism. And right now, I think that after the last bear market and just the catastrophe and collapses of the other shitcoins, it's very hard to contradict the Bitcoin maximalist now. You know, in a bear market, it's great to be a Bitcoin maximalist in a bear market because inevitably all the other shitcoins lose more than Bitcoin does, and they definitely lose against Bitcoin. And ultimately, you know, a Bitcoiner can feel confident holding a stash of Bitcoins in the bottom of a bear market, but a shitcoiner will not know if his coin will disappear in the 19,000s or if he was a top shitcoin. You know, I didn't hear about Luna until recently. Luna was a top shitcoin, like a blue chip shitcoin. But these ones can just actually disappear completely, which cannot happen to Bitcoin. So now, where we are now historically, we're at Bitcoin maximalism's dominant phase. And we need to strengthen that narrative right now a little bit more. And hopefully in the next next bull market, the foundation of the pain, really, the pain that the shitcoiners are feeling associated to the promise of Bitcoin maximalists, I think will lead to another cohort of Bitcoin maximalism. And I think the ship has sailed and we're good to go in terms of narrative for a while.
So Francis,
Sorry, I
Sorry,
had to
go
like
ahead.
take notes because you were making me think of so many things I wanted to bring up. So like I wanna respond because you inspired like a lot of different points I want to make, which is like you said, like I'll start with Luna. Like Luna dying and me, pointing out that it was obviously going to die before it did, and even like I felt so sure that I was making like literal predictions, price predictions, like time predictions. I was like, this is just I've seen this so many times that I literally will just make I'll predict this, and like I don't like to predict things, but like this one was just like I had like you mentioned, like because it's so easy to be right when you choose maximalism, you end up getting more and more confidence in each cycle. And so now that I see like this what happened to Luna, now I'm like, you know what? It's time for ETH to die, and I'm starting, maybe I'll be wrong and it'll still be around in a few years, but like I've been starting to tweet, like you said, we have to strengthen the narrative. Like I've been trying to say, you know what? ETH BTC is going to be a fucking wreck by next year. Like it's going to be like, mutilation, and people are going to be like, how the hell did this happen? Where did it come from? Because it's lasted way longer than it should have already anyway. And if not the next year, why not? But yeah, it helps. Bitcoin maximalism going mainstream, it helps just by being right and people witnessing it. And so I think that's one thing I wanted to bring up. I wanted to also comment on how you mentioned like toxicity and Lei Kuan or whatever her name is, who's a wretched person. Sorry, like to be a shit talker, but it's just true. What she was getting at, like she mentioned, like us not being tolerant or being welcoming and inclusive. What all shitcoiners want is like inclusivity of bullshit. They want tolerance. They want for bullshit. They want gullibility, and that's what they really want. Like when you start to try to like debate with a shitcoiner, it's never like the point where you say yes, but because of how Bitcoin works, it means that this shitcoin is not going to be better, and it's complexity on when it needs simplicity, and they'll never reply with. Well, you have a good point, John. They're going to say, well, then why did it pump? Why did it go up 100x and Bitcoin only went up 10x? Like they always have like bullshit arguments. And so that's what, like you said, like shitcoins are there to distract people from becoming Bitcoiners, to subvert, no coiners and other people from finding Bitcoin and exploit them for their gullibility and exploit them for their ignorance. And so Bitcoiners are the most caring, most inclusive, people interested in digital money and in the next age of money. So don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. They're just trying to scam you. They're just trying to sell their bags to you and probably even get your Bitcoin from you. So I wanted to mention that. And then you made me remember when you mentioned the Nakamoto Institute that we forgot to bring up Bitcoin Uncensored as people, notable people in Bitcoin maximalism. And so 2016, 2015 maybe, but mostly 2016, just before the fork wars and SegWit 2X and New York Agreement and all that, there was this, I don't know, some people have documented it somewhere. I mean, I hope you guys can find the videos, but there was a series by these two kind of shock jock Bitcoin podcasters who would live stream their show, and they were basically toxic maximalists. They had the same ideals and the same kind of, instinctual understanding of Bitcoin and how it played out in the world. And they became, for the time and for the size of Bitcoin at the time, pretty Bitcoin popular. And so their show was hilarious, and it was very like, well, it was uncensored. And so the nature of their guests, sometimes they would have like, hookers and drug dealers and, people that they considered to be the real users of Bitcoin. And they portrayed Bitcoin in a very like appropriate way and in a very fun way. And so I think it's just worth mentioning them as, part of the growth and a major, milestone in Bitcoin maximalists getting attention and educating others in a new way. So sorry for the rant, but those are the things you made me think of to bring up.
Yeah, and it's a good point to talk about the kind of like early maximalist podcasters. Chris and John Seth, the co-hosts, were definitely an influence on me. I like to think that perhaps it was we were all kind of like influencing each other. I know, John, you were also on friendly terms with him. At least I think you were on the show a few times. And then there was also this period with there's a few people that tell me Vortex. They mentioned Vortex as being Vortex is the one that just weekly would even though World Crypto Network was shitcoiny and there was shitcoiners on the show like Andy Hoffman and so on and so forth. Like Vortex was just consistently nailing the message. It's Bitcoin only. BTC sessions as well. I think a lot of people.
You're mentioning guys that managed to figure out how to be a lot friendlier than us as well.
Yes, exactly. No, you are correct. You're correct. These guys. I mean, I just don't have the personal and desire, motivation, and patience and incentive really to be polite about Bitcoin maximalism and to try to explain. It's just after like kind of like 10 years in this space, I just can't be bothered anymore. I kind of reserve that energy to people I love. Right. So my Bitcoin maximalism, if I'm at a party, for example, if someone tells me like, oh, I'm into Ether, I'll probably just say, okay, or I might turn my back on them. Funny story, in Miami 2022, I did ask a bunch of people, what's your favorite altcoin after Bitcoin? And everybody that responded anything other than what the fuck, I straight up turned my back on them and walked away. It caused a lot of friction, actually. I did that to some famous-ish Bitcoiner that I didn't know before. I think her name is Layla. She's a Twitter person. And then I asked her, I was like, well, do you know, are you she asked me if BullBitcoin, I've never met her, and it's just, some women at the table, and she asked me if BullBitcoin is a Bitcoin only exchange, and I say yes, actually it is. And I'm pretty sure I kind of invented the whole like Bitcoin only exchange concept and making it an explicit selling point. And I ask her, are you also a Bitcoin maximalist? Are you a fellow Bitcoin maximalist? And I say, well, she says, depends on your definition of Bitcoin maximalism. And I say, well, do you, only own Bitcoin? And she says, no, she has some other coins or something. And I immediately just turned my back on her. And I just completely stopped talking to her. I physically turn my back on people now that are shitcoiners. I just consciously make the effort. I want to punish them. I want to send a signal, right, that what they're doing is wrong. I don't want to spend energy on that at all. So I just visibly show my contempt and ignore. That's kind of the way I'm doing it now. But for family and friends, that's different, right? So for family and friends, I feel kind of a duty. There's that meme of the soldier who's on his knees protecting a sleeping child from projectiles, and that's the Bitcoin maximalism protecting the normie from the shitcoins. I don't have enough. My back's
call
not
it
wide
catcher
enough.
in the rye syndrome.
Is it? Do you?
Catcher in the
Please
rye.
elaborate.
Like he's worried about the kids falling off the cliff. Like it's a good mental image for me at least. But yeah,
Yes.
like you were saying, I think Leia is who you're talking about. Another similar name to the other woman, but she used to be like if I know who you're talking about, she used to be like a host on like this block TV show or something. I don't remember, but yeah, like these people like. They want tolerance just for their ignorance. And so it's like, I try to be nice, but it's like, in the end, it is an idiot test, like
Yes.
it's okay to be ignorant, but when you're presented with the information, like what else am I supposed to do? Like, I can't just keep holding your hand and rubbing your back and making you feel okay with Bitcoin maximalism. It just doesn't work that way.
Yes. And especially given the ludicrousness of the coins today, there's no ambiguity. I think there's very little ambiguity right now that these are. Back in the day, the shitcoins were like decentralized finance, and it's like new protocols and so on and so forth. There was some kind of ad hoc rationalization for the shitcoin. That honestly, the shitcoin pitch used to be way better, man. It used to be kind of good, the world computer, like you have this token that you use to spend, and that will go through a decentralized computer network, which will execute your smart contracts, which will allow you to, download child porn, Vitalik, or whatever fucking shit you want to do in a decentralized network. So there was kind of like a pitch behind the shitcoins that was like, all right, these have some kind of, they were utility tokens back in the day. But today, and especially the NFTs, and I hope we're going to get to touch a little bit on the NFTs. Well, I'm touching on it now. They're so full blown fucking retarded. They really are.
Yeah, I remember, like, I think you were there in the thread, but somebody was asking, like, something like, "What is Web3?" And I I had made a good reply. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was like basically, peer-to-peer software concepts with a token, like the
Yeah.
Ponzi scheme attached. It's like
Yeah.
that's all they do now is they take something that makes the internet cool and they make it seem like something that blockchain invented, and then they put a token on it.
Yeah. And the crazy part about that is there used to be some projects that I found interesting, and all of the ones that ever added a token on it, the token ended up tanking the project entirely. Obviously, because it fucks up the incentives, right? And many of these projects could have been done with Bitcoin. One of the ones that disappointed me the most was Joystream. I don't know if you remember that one. That was like BitTorrent.
Yeah. I was doing Exotica at the time, so I remember arguing with them. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Holy shit, that's true. Your Exotica phase. That's cool. I completely forgot about that actually. There was like Made Safe. Oh my god, so many nerds got burnt on Made Safe coin. Because Made Safe was like a pretty interesting project for decentralized computing and storage, and then they launched their Safe coin and just killed everybody that had been a safe enthusiast the whole time. So they just turned their whole user like base of contributors into like, they just made all of their contributors poor essentially. So fuck that. So yeah, adding the token to the project is guaranteeing almost to kill whatever it is that your decentralized protocol or whatever is doing, file storage or whatever. Because the thing is, like, I understand that some of these protocols may require some incentives, paying someone to do something, to perform a task. And all of these incentive mechanism payments obviously can be done with Bitcoin. But
for sure.
But it prevents you from raising capital. One person that did not do that deserves a huge shout out actually is the Open Bazaar guy, right?
I think they became Bcashers.
They definitely pivoted to to not just only supporting Bitcoin. They definitely pivoted to try to find relevance, but not to shill too much. But one of the ways I describe Synonym and what we do is I always felt like Bitcoiners didn't have like the rest of the argument. Like we would tell shitcoiners, don't do that. You don't need a blockchain for that. But we wouldn't tell them what to do instead. We would just say, just use Bitcoin. But like they were trying to like figure out how to do like decentralized web problems and solve like identity and storage and kill big tech. But they had the wrong idea by having to include a shitcoin and have a token that represented the network fees of this shitcoin, and we never really had something to replace and say this is what you should do. And so like a big part of what I'm trying to do and what we work on at Synonym is filling that gap and saying, here, now you don't need a shitcoin anymore. Oh, you want to do this, web tech, you want to do this use case and you want to combine it with crypto? Look, we did it with Bitcoin. You just use Bitcoin to pay, and here's the technology you use alongside of it, complementing it, all in an application that supports both things. And so like sometimes, I've joked with people on the team before, like we've been like, this other project that somebody's working on is actually pretty cool. It's a little bit different than what we're doing, but I'm a little bit worried that like maybe they'll win and then they'll get users before we do. And then like a week later they add a shitcoin to it and like
what's
no
the
problem,
implications?
that's
Do you
gonna
think
fail.
the network will split off and they'll
And so we can keep
utterly kind of like disperse, or
that's I think it's important to
what's your theory, John?
teach these lessons. Man, where to start? Maybe we should give so many reasons. Like the reason why, like Vitalik, if I remember correctly, he like created Ethereum because he wanted to do Ethereum bullshit on Bitcoin, and Bitcoiners said no, this won't work. It's a bad idea, and so he got rejected from Bitcoin with his ideas, and he got rejected. And there was also these stories like I was there, and like when he was trying to pitch like these quantum mining Bitcoin scam things, and he was trying to find an angle, and people kept seeing the angle. And so he decided to just leave and make Ethereum. And from the beginning, the core thing about all of this and why it will fail is the reason why Bitcoin works is because of its design. And the only way it can maintain its design is by being as lightweight and simple as possible while enforcing the design. And so that's why there are like these magic numbers for how big the blocks can be and how frequent the blocks can be. And that's why like people don't pretend that we can do bajillions of transactions per second and onboard, billions of people at a time. It's because people understand that there are problems with, having a maximally decentralized setup where everybody is running a node, and that if you can't run a node, you can't actually know what the truth is and enforce what the truth is. And so when Vitalik proposes adding all of this complexity to the Bitcoin design to create a new network and a new protocol, it's going to fail. It's just a matter of time. And even worse, they keep adding more. Like, for example, NFTs. If you had asked early Bitcoiners, hey, can we do this with Bitcoin? Is it a good idea? They would say no, because here's what will happen. If you try to make every single item on Bitcoin unique and you try to make it a bearer instrument, you're going to end up with way too many items, and you're going to entirely bloat the entire chain until all of the fees become astronomical and the value of the things becomes lower than the value of the cost to transfer them. And that's exactly what you started to see play out with Ethereum. The fees have gone up, and people, the NFT market's dying. And it's like you can predict these things when you understand the dynamics at play. And so Ethereum is really stressing, it's pushing its luck, basically. Instead of just trying to do ICOs or just trying to be a different thing than Bitcoin and have some smart contract composability, they keep doubling down on the complexity of these things. And they keep making these fractal Ponzi's like DeFi, where you just print more tokens inside of the tokens inside of the tokens. And they keep doubling down. They keep leaning on these things with complexity in order to have narratives to attract, gullible and ignorant people. And so eventually they're going to run out of headroom, and they are going to realize, kind of like what Solana's realizing, where Solana tried to be, the only way you can be the better shitcoin is to be the more centralized shitcoin. And Solana can't even do that. Like it's like huge hardware requirements to be able to run a Solana node, and Solana can't keep the network up because they keep trying to make new NFT things on it, and it's just too much. And so this is the problem: is if you want a distributed, decentralized thing, it has to be as simple and as lightweight as possible, so everybody can actually even run the thing and can even sync up with what the truth is of the network. Yeah, so that would be my answer.
So Francis, you're back again. So kind of we go off script, but like, what do you think? Kind of like Ethereum moving from proof of work to proof of stake, will that be the downfall? Will the network fork? How will this all kind of play out, and how will that shitcoin die?
I mean, I don't know what is going to be the exact downfall. I am utterly uninterested in proof of work to proof of stake as stake transition. There's a lot of proof of stake coins. I mean, I think that's kind of somewhat irrelevant to Ethereum's demise. The number one reason why Ethereum's going to fail fundamentally is that it's not Bitcoin. The second reason why it's going to fail, it's because of the 72% pre-mine, right? So the top of the pyramid of Ethereum is so incredibly concentrated that at some point the disparity of wealth is just too much for people to stay in that one pyramid, which leads me to my third point. Ethereum is reproducible. There is nothing that Ethereum does that the other blockchain 3.0, 4.0 generations. I'm not exactly so familiar with the last one. I know about Tron. I know about Solana. I know about Cardano. I think there's way more. I think there's Binance Chain. Anyway, all of those chains are basically doing what the purpose of what people value Ethereum for, which is to issue tokens. And I mean, that's it, to issue tokens, right? So like, all the other blockchains have like one use case is to create other tokens. I don't believe anybody is like really actually using the Ethereum like smart locks or whatever the fuck they were supposed to be doing, like, you know, decentralized smart contracts. I think it's everybody's boiled it down to just like issue more tokens and
More Ponzi designs.
or Ponzi design. It's very fractal. It's pretty crazy. But all of these things are reproducible, right?
You know, to
And we
that
have
point, he asked earlier if Satoshi was a maximalist, and we couldn't, you know, honestly say that we know he totally was, other than some examples we give maybe about how he has behaved like one. But you know who was a maximalist was Hal Finney, and he made the exact point you're making. Somebody said,
indeed.
I can't recall what the quote is, but it's like somebody mentioned the idea of more blockchains with, I think maybe it was like faster block times or something like this, or maybe it was even the conversation about Namecoin. I don't remember. But he basically said, well, if you can add another Bitcoin or another blockchain, how do you protect yourself from the next guy adding another one? Like it just becomes this infinite fractal loop of inflation. Like he didn't say those words, but this was the idea he was basically communicating. He's like, it makes no sense to have more Bitcoins. So he was probably the first maximalist.
Yes, and I believe that in their public narrative, again, I've blocked so many shitcoiners. I block anybody that has a hashtag of a shitcoin or anything like that. So I'm kind of cut off. But I believe through the ones that are remaining on my feed because they're based and they're anti-COVID hysteria, that a lot of the shitcoiners are very toxic towards other shitcoins. And they all kind of like say, you know, I like Bitcoin too. Bitcoin has some flaws because obviously the shitcoiner pitch is Bitcoin has flaw X. My shitcoin solves flaw X. Therefore, you should hedge your Bitcoin position with my shitcoin. That's kind of like the main, I would say the main shitcoiner argument. But towards other shitcoins, I think they're quite toxic. Like the Ethereum and Solana people, I think are, and Tron people, they're kind of like all kind of toxic towards each other. It's a cannibalistic, it's an endlessly cannibalistic system, right? And Hal was the absolute fucking goat. By the way, John, just unrelated. I think we may have talked about this once, but I started to develop the idea that Hal came up with the fixed supply for Bitcoin. I don't know when I started to think of this idea. The premise for this was that the fixed supply for Bitcoin was not in the white paper, and it appeared kind of like randomly out of the software. You know, the first release. It was just in it and implied. It wasn't explained. Actually, that's a very interesting thing, right? Satoshi did not exactly when he released it. He was like sound money. You know, it was just kind of there. So in between the publication of the white paper, which has no mention of the economics, and the publication of the software, which has the economics built in, some discussion, something happened. You know, a decision was reached as to, and I think Satoshi would have probably understood that that was the key decision to be made, and would have involved people. And who else would he have involved other than Hal? And Hal, you know, being the genius, and I like to think that Hal was the one that kind of like suggested and pushed in that direction. Although,
Well,
you know,
you're probably right. I want to mention an additional trivia that is related, which is Hal is also the only person to ever inflate Bitcoin. There was a short time where Bitcoin, it only had 2 decimal places. It was 21, or you know, I might get some of the minority details here wrong, but the general gist is this: that it was like 21.00. And then adding 6 more zeros, I believe, was a pull request or a change that Hal Finney instantiated. So it wasn't always 2.1 quadrillion Bitcoin. It was, you know, something like 100,000 times less than that at one point.
Yes, and John, I remember us having this discussion in Austin about, you know, does it consist? I think we're going to skip that discussion for now because it's a very deep one. It's a very deep one. I think this is the only topic I've ever disagreed on you about. So let's keep that one for a special episode maybe one day. But yeah, I mean the infinite reproducibility of Bitcoin and the irreproducibility of the infinite reproducibility of Ethereum and the other shitcoins versus the absolute irreproducibility of Bitcoin is ultimately what makes Bitcoin the only potential candidate for survival. There are a lot of layers to the scarcity of Bitcoin. There is, of course, the fact that Satoshi invented digital scarcity in the first place by preventing the double spend mechanism, by I don't think there was an an uncopyable digital asset or thing on the internet before Bitcoin. I don't remember that existing. So just generally speaking, Satoshi invented digital scarcity via the double spend
Digital
prevention
bearer
mechanism.
instrument, to have an
Yeah,
enforceable digital bearer instrument did not
yeah,
exist before this. Like, it was always something that could be duplicated, or you needed trust to be able to pass it. Like,
right.
to have
Yeah,
it be where you can be the only owner of something and prove it, like that,
yes,
that's the core quality of Bitcoin is I
right.
have my score and it's mine, and you can't touch it without my key.
Yes, for sure. One of the key things about there's also obviously like in the monetary policy, there is scarcity built in. There's also the fact that the monetary policy is the way that it's enforced, right? With the intricate dynamic of economic nodes and miners validating blocks and the incentive for miners to not change the rules so that their blocks are accepted by the largest economic node majority, so that they can they spend the electricity up front, so they need to monetize it by having the economic nodes accept it for presumably USD or whatever, which will they'll pay their bills with. So that like decentralized, what I call the Nakamoto consensus, is unique to Bitcoin. It's theoretically could be replicated, but it hasn't been replicated. And what is very like the proof in the pudding, I think, maybe for me, I don't remember ever having doubts about Bitcoin, but certainly after the 2x SegWit 2x fork failed, where the attackers were trying to change one of the rules of Bitcoin by inflating the block size, which to an outsider is something that's kind of like trivial, right? It's like, 1 megabyte to 2 megabyte, but 90% plus of the hash power combined with the largest Bitcoin institutions and economic nodes like, Coinbase and BitPay and blockchain.info and BlockCypher and all these guys, Kraken, Bitstamp, all these guys were in on it, they were not able to change that rule. So how the fuck do you think that someone will be able to change something as fundamental as a 20 million Bitcoin supply limit, and also be able to convince everybody that this new shitcoin with a new monetary policy is Bitcoin, is the same thing as Bitcoin? I mean, that is extremely unlikely. I mean, extremely unlikely is not the right word. It's just fucking impossible.
Well,
And
a
go
big
ahead.
part of what we were trying to defend with the SegWit 2x wars wasn't necessarily the concept of scaling Bitcoin a little bit. It was that it required a hard fork. And so it was like,
Indeed.
and personally, like, I don't believe in hard forks. Like, I think as presented as a concept, they do not exist. You can make a copy
Agreed.
of Bitcoin, you can make a new like blockchain, but you cannot hard fork Bitcoin. And that was the risk. That is that this was my like I didn't maybe express it this like simply back then, but this was my core understanding of like how Bitcoin worked, that I just knew that there was no way you would have any guarantees if you tried to hard fork Bitcoin. You would end up with two Bitcoins, which is basically, it did kind of happen with Bcash. While they didn't necessarily, they did explicitly plan to make a copy. That's the same result would have happened had SegWit 2x not stopped and not had a actually it had a it had a halting stop in its design anyway. As we learned after the fact, it was a very correct thing to avoid it because the design was actually faulty and the whole blockchain did halt when they tried to run what would have been the SegWit 2x fork. So we protected Bitcoin to a great degree. Not that this is about maximalism so much, but I'm sure we would be remiss to mention that you and I both feel that we did have a small failure in that war, and that we weren't really smart enough or educated enough to realize that the SegWit 2x block and the addition of block size was also a compromise and a failure to protect Bitcoin on the part of non-core developers. And that was kind of slipped in a way where, despite trying to fight against the block size increase in hard fork, we somehow did end up with a block size increase.
Maybe that's why I'm so toxic today, is to compensate for this weakness, that this lack of will, I guess, and resolve at that time, where we made this compromise to protect Bitcoin in the long term. But ultimately, I believe, John, right now in hindsight, that they would have forked off on their shit, their fucking shitcoin, but ultimately people would have kept on. Some people would have stayed on the first chain. They may have Coinbase may have called their shitcoin Bitcoin. BitPay may have called their shitcoin Bitcoin. All these companies would eventually have failed because of that decision. So, was the weight compromise with these businesses necessary? In hindsight, I believe that not having done that compromise may have caused a lot of collateral damage, and maybe they would have gone through the 2x in the end without that size compromise. But it happened. But all of this was related to Ethereum, where Ethereum is extremely centralized, and because it is centralized, it will be corrupted. It is obviously already corrupted. It's been corrupted since Ethereum launched in 2014. I think I used to follow Ethereum a little bit more because I was interested in general blockchain consulting, even though I was always a maximalist, but I was specifically interested in open timestamps and PGP, and kind of like trying to convince corporations to use open timestamps and PGP to do their own, non-decentralized kind of like crypto systems. To tap into the blockchain buzz and to make sure that those corporations wouldn't go for the fucking token. So I was kind of following Ethereum a little bit, just not outright blocking it out. And you could see like the corporations that were running the nodes, like the node running corporations.
I think we lost Francis again.
We lost Francis again. Yeah.
So I'll make a little segue that's related, which is that the conversation about the SegWit wars, SegWit 2x and New York Agreement and all of that is relevant to the topic of Ethereum going from proof of work to proof of stake.
I am back.
In other words, we already learned the lesson of what happens when you try to hard fork, a quote unquote popular blockchain, if you want to frame it this way. And inevitably, what is the most likely thing to happen if Ethereum attempts, an aggressive migration to a hard fork of Ethereum to 2.0 and proof of stake, is you're going to end up with 2 Ethereums. Technically 3, because Ethereum Classic really is the original. But you're going to end up with a much more confusing outcome where there will be people on either side that believe theirs is the real one. And so most likely what would happen is be probably something like the actual users of Ethereum will probably continue to use the original, and then the kind of owners of Ethereum will be left persuading everybody to use the proof of stake one because that's where they have the most power. And so you'll have this really strange, ultimately toxic, relationship between old Ethereum and new Ethereum that will probably play out in the death of both. So that's probably one prediction you could try to make about Ethereum proof of stake.
That's what I love about Bitcoin, is that you don't have to keep up constantly with, or rather, you should not have to constantly keep up with the social media shit, the forums, the videos, the YouTube debates, the conferences, in order to make an educated decision as to which chain is Ethereum, and then you have money technically on both chains, and then you're trying to decide how to pay for rent, and you're having to make all of these decisions, whereas the function of money is.
But then you're just a toxic maximalist who refuses to learn about ZK optimistic rollups, man. Like, right. What's your problem?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the maximalist is definitely the populist. Is definitely the one who cares about the people the most, who has a and Bitcoin maximalists that are outspoken, toxic Bitcoin maximalists that are outspoken, are really are like defenders of the people, because we could just shut the fuck up and just like do our own shit, and we have our own convictions. We don't need to convince ourselves not to sell by convincing others not to sell, right? My ability to convince others not to sell does not increase or decrease my own confidence of my Bitcoin holdings. So the whole concept of Bitcoin maximalism as a thing that is talked about and advocated is to defend the innocent from the malevolent, which is the shitcoiners that are trying to convince them, yes, gamble, speculate, yes, 2.0, ding, 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 that are doing like the fucking casino noises with all of their new features, the NFTs with their bright lights are just like kind of like casino, like slot lights, and trying to get people hooked on this gambling addiction. And honestly, it is gambling addiction. A lot of the prominent shitcoiners, John, that we know. I don't want to name any names, but a lot of them were into pink stocks, penny stocks, right? So the most prominent shitcoiner and money changer in the Bitcoin space before Bitcoin was heavily involved in those penny stock and binary forex platforms. In fact, it is because Bitcoin was being used as a method of payment that person got into the Bitcoin space ultimately in the beginning. And pushing the idea of currency competition as being something permanent is pushing the idea of permanently having collateral damage from experimentation of who is the fittest. It's insane, right? It's kind of like, nowadays, we don't kill off the weak of the human race. You know what I mean? Like, we figured out as a race how to maintain our superiority over the animal kingdom without having to kill off the weak. We don't need collateral damage anymore. For example, we have medicine, to cure ourselves. We don't need to kill off the sick in order to make
This
sure
is
that
like
only.
Getting a little philosophical, but this is like related to concepts of nihilism and related to the difference between exploiting people and cooperating with people. And so like this is like you will see this theme in everything shitcoiny, everything about shitcoins, everything about exchanges that promote shitcoins. Like everything is about exploitation. They're there to milk their customers, to to shorn them like sheep. They're there to exploit them and yield them. And so you can find this theme in all of their narratives and all of their behaviors and all of their persuasions. Like all they're trying to do is exploit people. Whereas Bitcoiners are trying to enable people and empower people and provide services and products to people. Like there's always fair trade. There's always, fair competition. And so Bitcoiners tend to have like morals, because you can't understand Bitcoin and appreciate it without them. Like what we're trying to do is have the game be as fair as possible. And as it turns out, if you can rely on the money not being inflated by authorities and not being exploited by people without your own awareness, then you can have a much fairer game and thus a much more effective evolution.
That it really disgusts me, John, and you're so right, because okay, so as a newbie, you sign up to a Bitcoin exchange. That Bitcoin exchange is not just a service provider in the free market. That is an authoritative source of education for you as a person, right? So where are you going to get your Bitcoin education from? Well, you're going to get it from wherever you're getting the proximity to Bitcoin, which is probably likely to be through your exchange account as a beginner. And the fact that these exchanges are aggressively pushing, and the way that they write their marketing message, and I get those marketing messages from Kraken in my updates. I haven't blocked Kraken in my updates because I kind of like to see those things coming. And I do read some of the shitcoin marketing emails that I get from Kraken just out of curiosity, morbid curiosity maybe. But they're always kind of framed in a way that has a lot of plausible deniability, like do your own research. The fucking lamest epitaph ever.
We used to joke about the idea of quote
Yeah.
unquote put your Bitcoin to work. It was like it was one of our maximalist memes. Is like when they say this to you, they're scamming. And like it was like last week I saw a Bitstamp ad in Twitter. Put your Bitcoin to work, and I was like, fuck my life. Bitstamp used to be a good one. Like
that just means give me your Bitcoins, right? Give me
gamble
Bitcoins.
your Bitcoin.
I will make them work.
Roll
I will
the
put them.
dice.
Yes, no, that's exactly it. And then, and as a normie, you're like, all right, so Kraken is one of the biggest, oldest exchanges in the world, and then they've just listed this coin. They sent me an email. They said that it could be the future of stable coins, and it's kind of like a hockey coach that's mentally manipulating, his students. That is a relationship. And the shitcoiners always used the fucking free market defense. Like, it's a free market, man. We're just serving the free market. It's like, okay, you're not just serving the free market. You're emotionally and intellectually and psychologically manipulating people into buying junk that you yourself do not purchase. There's very, very little difference in my mind between a seller of fentanyl, for example, and operating an exchange. By the way, I did actually have this conversation with a person very high up at one of those money changers. The person had a tear in their eye because they were like, Francis, do you actually think that I'm just as bad as a fentanyl dealer? And I said, I'm not going to say the name of the person, but I said, yes. Yes, you are, because you are preying. You are a predator preying on the weakness of people, and that weakness is financial despair and greed and
Yeah, I mean
gambling
these
addiction.
arguments are like basically they're it's like they're either mental midgets, they're stupid, they're not developed people, or they are malicious and evil. Like
Yeah,
there's not really and to the the victim cannot tell the difference between
yeah,
somebody that is trying to exploit them and somebody that is just making a mistake, because the difference does not matter. You are the collateral damage. And
yeah, yeah.
so like you can't like be they're literally designed to exploit ignorance and promote ignorance. They're pure evil.
Right. And I mean, okay, so even if we go, because it's the free market argument is a trap. There's to as an anti-libertarian, and if you're in the Bitcoin space, if you're not in the libertarian category, you're kind of outside of the Overton window. So you kind of have to be libertarian-ish, at least in the crypto space, in order for your argument to be considered. If you're a fucking communist, talking about how you're not in the discussion in crypto at all. So they're framing this, as you're not a free market person. But the thing is, okay, first of
Yeah,
all,
an intelligent person is going to frame this around the relationship of violence in
yes,
humans. Like that's
yes,
really what it's about.
yes, yes, absolutely. And then, what they're not saying is, first of all, what you're doing is fraud, because you are the information in a free market. Information must be able to flow accurately between all parties, and what you're doing is you're creating disinformation, misinformation. You're preventing the spread of information in order to gain an advantage over the other party. So it is. And another thing also, John, is that a currency exchange transaction is never win-win. It is always a zero-sum game. And most of the time, because there is a third party involved that takes a fee in a forex exchange, it's a less than zero-sum game for the two participants. That is that, kind of like in a poker game where the house takes a cut. You never win in and I've been a currency trader forever. I mean, since 2013. So if I exchange CD to USD with someone else, one of us will win, one of us will lose every single time. And
Yeah,
there is
I
no
would frame it. I would say like pure abstracted trade is always a
yeah,
zero sum game. But value is ultimately subjective. So when it's a barter of some kind, like how many dollars I pay for my food, this is not zero sum.
no,
This is
no,
either fair trade or one person getting more
yeah,
than the other. Like
yeah,
it's when you're dealing in abstractions, it's
yeah,
always zero sum. And
yeah,
I've tweeted about this recently, like about how like traders are immoral. And basically, like, if you're just purely trading, all you can really do is cause somebody else to lose. You can't provide a service, you can't provide a product. You can just cause somebody else to have less than you. It's a pure, raw, brutal competition. And
yes,
yes, you could argue it's your duty to relieve idiots from their money, but then why aren't you stealing candy from babies and all of these other horrible things? Because this whole free market concept falls apart when you start appreciating that free markets do not free you from consequences. And
that's correct.
even if Bitcoin dismantles the government, you're still going to face ultimate violence from the people that you wrong. They will
Yeah,
either
yeah,
spontaneously come and find you, or they will form new governments or new militias. But humans will not stand for you to exploit them and commit indirect violence upon them without retaliating with violence. we are physical beings and you cannot escape this. And so
Yeah.
people like Eric Voorhees, who like want to say like free market, bro, you know, like why you don't support free markets? People can't just make whatever product and coin they want and say whatever they want. It's like, nah, man, because what you want is you want to blame the government, you know, and use that as a narrative to do your crimes and then use the protection of the government to do it. Like, but what you don't understand is without that government, the people that you wrong will come and they'll take your head. Like this is
Indeed.
not like some kind of magical fairyland where you're playing a video game and the losers are just going to be like, well, he got me. Like, no,
It,
like
it,
you're
it's kind of
fucking
like those
evil.
games, you know, those like con games where there's like a cup and a ball, you know, and ultimately the the magician or whatever has the ball is cupped in his hand, you know, so there's no way that you can pick the right outcome. The game is rigged. But well, you know, I didn't force you to play my game. I just enticed you to play my game. The rules were rigged so that I always win and that it's a zero-sum game for you. Maybe I'll make you win a few times. It's a free market, bro. You know, I
It's
mean, yes,
entertainment, bro. I'm just providing
yes,
entertainment.
yes, exactly. I'm providing entertainment. I'm giving you the opportunity to have a huge depression, you know, out of which you may have personal growth. You know, you look on the bright side, you know, you lost all your money, but now you know how much you care about your family. I don't
At
know,
least you're
but
alive.
yes, at least you're still alive. So just to say, I mean, and this is the part of the shitcoinery that I find to be inherently malevolent. And you know, sometimes I used to be more of a pragmatic Bitcoin maximalist, but now I've become a very, very dogmatic, like radical, and and I'll be honest, I feel an almost religious sense of a mission in this, right? Um, it is not, I have a feeling like the higher power up there, God or spirit or whatever, is happy of the path that I'm taking to denounce the shitcoinery and trying to protect the innocent. It is a righteous, it is a good path, it is the right way. I feel this in my bones absolutely, completely, that shitcoinery is one of the most malevolent forces out there, because Bitcoin is the only force that a force of light in this world that can provide a realistic, peaceful transition out of the, I don't know what you would call it, fiat banking system, centralized nation state fiat system. You know, the internet and AI are kind of like forces of chaos and potential evil. Bitcoin arise from the internet as a source of light for us to kind of get out of this shit. And the shitcoins are just trying to prevent people from getting into this kind of like redemption. I see that as, you know, I'll even say, if imagine Satan is real, and imagine if we're in a game theory context, imagine the devil is a real thing. What would you do to chip away at Bitcoin? You would infinitely corrupt it. You would try to corrupt it. You would try to corrupt the idea. You would try to dilute it. You would try to deceive people, right? It's a deceiving thing. So shitcoins are not just a phenomenon that is an economic phenomenon. It is definitely a moral. There's a moral, ethical duty, I believe, to make them disappear because of the collateral damage they cause on innocence.
So, Francis, let me just kind of jump in here. So, what do you think is the best argument? Like a twofold question, and John, I'd like you to answer that one as well. What's the best argument for Bitcoin maximalism, and what is somehow an understandable argument against it? So, play devil's advocate on here. What is an argument for Bitcoin maximalism, and what's one that you kind of consider a valid or a potentially kind of understandable argument that many people have?
I mean, in terms of the arguments for Bitcoin maximalism, I think we've kind of laid out a bunch of them throughout the spaces, I would say. One, it is inevitable. So, you know, the question is rather, I see it as inevitable personally. Right? So the question is rather, when will it emerge? When will Bitcoin become the sole currency? Is it sooner? Is it later? That's the only thing that kind of matters. If it's sooner, less people suffer from collateral damage. If it's later, more people suffer from collateral damage. Although if it's later, maybe I'll have more Bitcoins than if it's sooner. So my incentive actually would be to be a shitcoiner, if I was purely incentive. But I think the underlying argument for Bitcoin maximalism is that it is economically inevitable. And the argument that I would say is if multiple currencies coexist.
Oh, we lost him.
We lost him. John, please go ahead.
Okay. So I will, as far as like an argument for Bitcoin, I will go back to like abstract principles, which would just be, if you imagine all of life and humanity and society as like this evolutionary struggle, the best way to abstract this competition and both this cooperation of humans as a society and this competition of them for evolution and survival of the fittest is to have the game be fair and for everybody to be playing the same game. And so Bitcoin is the first time we've been able to have like an absolutely totally abstracted, game where we could score something and where there's no like context in Bitcoin. Like there's no how much dollars a Bitcoin is worth in the Bitcoin protocol. There's no, how beautiful this woman is or successful this man is. It's just purely numbers, accounts, and scores. And so the argument for Bitcoin is just saying, like, if you want to strip away all of the bullshit and all the context and have just this pure mechanism for valuing, anything you want, any way you want within society, in this like digital society, you have it. You finally have a way to just all have everybody converge on one game, on one score system, and let everybody compete or cooperate. And the only way you can gain score is if somebody gives you some of theirs. So it encourages a form of cooperation and interaction. And if you have more score than somebody else's, you have more resources at your control. And so you have some way of basically having a confident store of value. You can say, if there's, like I tell people, the simplest way I can put Bitcoin to people is just to say, if you have value that you do not intend to spend within, the next few years, it should simply be stored in Bitcoin. There's no reason to store it in anything else because everything else has more context. It's less abstracted. And so you may as well just say, look, I know that everybody's going to converge on Bitcoin over time, and I'm not going to need this value for some years, so I better put it in Bitcoin. And that would be my kind of way of describing the for. For against, I'd say that generally it's kind of funny that like the people that hate Bitcoin and want to win against it, they don't use any of the good arguments against Bitcoin. They used to be a little bit better at it and use better arguments. But there are like multiple arguments. Like we could definitely be wrong. Somebody could make something even simpler and even more, scalable. But like a good argument would be Bitcoin, like by design, does not scale. And so we can't actually fit 7 billion people all holding their own keys and sending transactions to each other all day. Like, in order for everybody to use Bitcoin both as a store of value and as a currency, like there's a lot of innovation and change and maybe just possibly raw scale that needs to be added. And what I mean by raw scale is we might actually have to like increase the block size, and maybe even increase the amount of Bitcoins. I have no idea how to actually get Bitcoin to be fully usable for everybody and be the only thing. There's a lot of considerations. And so that's the part where we could be wrong, in that we might reach scaling limits on Bitcoin like earlier than the demand has been met for people wanting something like Bitcoin. And if that happens, there could be a lot of tension. There could be wars. There could be violence. There could be people demanding more UTXOs and more transactions per minute. Who knows how it will play out? And if Bitcoin doesn't respond in a satisfactory way, it could, I don't think it would result in the demise of Bitcoin so much as a future we did not want, a future we could not predict, more than one game, a splitting of the setup. So it not scaling is a pretty good argument. And maybe another interesting one is, theoretically, you have to always like appreciate that the way things are the way they are for a reason, and that they have come to be this way through thousands of years of evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of society, and there are hundreds of years of technologies. Like there's a lot to consider what got us here, and whatever got us here worked to get us here. And so there is a possibility that there is a role to inflation that actually is good, and it's just that the flavor and the way we have deployed it through governments controlling it is what's bad. And maybe programmatic inflation could end up being something that actually is good. And people will talk about like the free rider problem, for example. And there's a little bit of tension between some Bitcoiners between the idea of that, like, I actually believe Bitcoin is the most valuable when the most people are using it and the most people are spending it. You're spending it, you're actually using it. You're using it as a currency, you're buying something, there's activity. But some people believe, they literally say, I'm going to hold my Bitcoin forever. I am never going to spend it. I can't actually rationalize that. I can't say, I hear that and I say, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, the only thing you can do with Bitcoin is spend it. And so, yes, I think you should use it to save, but I think the concept of just never spending it is not rational. And so I think that maybe there could be some tension there one day where, for example, if we can't have enough UTXOs for the amount of people that want to use it, we may need to scale it in ways that make, traditional Bitcoiners uncomfortable. I'm glad that I'll probably be dead by then and not have to be part of that process. I prefer to live forever, but these are very hard questions, and I think that you can have tough conversations about Bitcoin, and they are reasonable, but none of them refute Bitcoin in the present day or in any remotely soon generation. So I think that they're just mostly philosophical and theoretical conversations worth having, and definitely not arguments for shitcoins. So, yeah.
So, Francis, do you think we're going to run out of UTXOs? That's going to be an attack vector? Or what do you think, kind of like just playing, like if you would need to play devil's advocate, what is the one reason kind of like why Bitcoin might fail or Bitcoin maximalism might fail?
I hate playing devil's advocate. I don't believe in that at all. But I will play along. I think that John's argument about scalability of Bitcoin is the only one that I would even address, because if the layered scaling of Bitcoin as currently devised, which is, Lightning being the most popular solution or other second layer solutions that could be decentralized and censorship resistant, if these do not materialize, then it will require people to do on-chain transactions to have censorship-free payments. And if on-chain transactions are required to have censorship-free payments, perhaps a secondary coin would emerge for censorship-resistant payments, despite the mental transaction costs, despite the overwhelming economic downsides of having two currencies, because there is still a demand that Bitcoin is not fulfilling in the core features of money. So that is the only argument that I would entertain.
I want to mention that, we laid a groundwork here of that shitcoins are basically inflationary or counterfeit Bitcoins, and that what your portrayal is actually just another rearranging of one of the ones I mentioned, which is like that people may demand more Bitcoins and they may demand inflation. And so that's the same thing as saying another shitcoin so they can offload and reduce costs. Well, you would have the same effect if you just made more Bitcoins.
That's yes, and correct. And but my fucking devil's advocate argument relies on the premise that a second censorship resistant blockchain based payments layer is possible, which is
we're getting into devil's advocate of devil's advocate now, but to play the devil's advocate of you, I would say, well, the reason why I frame it as that people may demand more Bitcoins instead of more blockchains is that the way proof of work works is it makes it so you can't have more blockchains, in the end game. And so that's why I frame it that way, is because yes, you could make another blockchain in a Bitcoin only world, but then the Bitcoin world could simply eat it alive. And so it's why bother, you know?
Correct. And given if we cannot scale in a decentralized way, we will scale with the Bitcoin Bank way, which is Bitcoin payments occurring on a centralized ledger of a financial institution. And if that happens, then the people will request more Bitcoins. As you say, they will want more Bitcoins, and that will occur not through a protocol change, because I believe what we said. If we hard fork Bitcoin to create more Bitcoins, that is just not a proposition that would ever work sustainably. However, fractionally reserve creating Bitcoins, if only a very, very small minority of people are able to send and receive payments from their Bitcoin node, from their Bitcoin wallet using their own node, or just from their own Bitcoin wallet. The node part's pretty irrelevant. Well, it might not be relevant in the
Yeah,
future.
well, if you incorporate trust in the design, all kinds of options open up. There are tons of designs you can do if you're willing to trust. And so
Yes.
the concern is
So
that
I
we
guess,
revert, though. The concern is that we go back to the system we have. And maybe that's
yeah,
what we do as humans. Maybe there's an ebb and a flow. It's like, you have, strong men create good times, create weak
perhaps,
men, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's what will happen in society. Like over 1,000-year spans, Bitcoins will emerge, and then governments will emerge to provide Bitcoin scale. And then new Bitcoin will emerge and dismantle the
yes.
government. Maybe there's a cycle to this. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe there is a cycle. I hope that from a almost spiritual sense, I do hope that Bitcoin is the end of the endless cycle. It's the beginning of a post a boom and a post fourth turning, when there is no longer a turning. But yeah, I think the only reasonable counter argument to Bitcoin maximalism and Bitcoin's dominance is that it is only possible with some element of custody and trust. And if we do that, then we are falling back into, as you just described, we're falling back into the old system. So that is an entertaining.
Fried
We
out
lost
again.
Francis again. Okay. But how about kind of like, while Francis rejoins again, let's kind of like move into a controversial question. So John, why do you feel Bitcoin maximalists are split over Bit 119? Uh,
CTV.
exactly. Would you say that the philosophy of Bitcoin maximalism is also important in the social consensus forming of the Bitcoin protocol itself? So how does Bitcoin maximalism kind of like play into the whole social consensus mechanism of kind of like even adopting software changes to Bitcoin?
Sure. I think I can answer this without even being specific about CTV, really, because it could be any soft fork. And so I think that there's a correlation with Bitcoin maximalism and in Bitcoin like ossification. And while I don't think that I am, a promoter, a total, extreme conservative in promoting ossification at this moment, I think it is the correct default position. And what I mean by that is, like, to run Bitcoin and to defend Bitcoin is to run a node. And that means that you are defining what Bitcoin is. And when somebody else wants to change the definition of Bitcoin, whether it be soft fork or hard fork, that is indistinguishable to 99.9% of people from an attack. And so the only mechanism for actually updating Bitcoin is actually in a first principles way, in a core way. It's trust. This is the mechanism by which Bitcoin updates travel, and the consensus changes or becomes modified, or new rules are added to Bitcoin. And so soft forks are the adding of additional rules to Bitcoin, and hard forks are changing of the existing rules of Bitcoin. And so soft forks are typically something that can be done, quote unquote, safely. But the problem is that they increase the surface and the complexity of Bitcoin. And this is already something that we established is what makes shitcoins bad, and shitcoins die in the shadow of Bitcoin. And so every time that we add a little scale, add a little feature, add a little change. We are basically taking a speculative risk on the existing user base in order to speculate on expanding the user base somehow. And this is probably a worthwhile dynamic for the most part, but it is a risk. It is reckless because the average Bitcoiner cannot evaluate a change. Even if like you have me or Guy Swan explain, something to you in a very intelligent way, in a very researched way, we could be wrong and we could be biased and we could be lying to you. And and most people have no ability to go in there, read the code. And even the ones that don't have the wherewithal to consider all the permutations of all the effects and interactions of this change that may result. And so you have to have this very, very raw, first principle understanding of every dynamic of Bitcoin to even attempt to suggest a new design for Bitcoin or an altered design. And then you have to have other people that are trustworthy enough and experienced enough to audit it, and then have their own trust networks of people that will believe them. And now you can propagate this trust to update Bitcoin. And so my issue with CTV is that simply, as a soft fork proposal, the signaling of the creator has been very aggressive. And he has a history, in my own estimation. Now, you can trust me or not trust me. This is the problem. In my own estimation, he has a history of behaving this way and a history of compromising, basically prioritizing his design or ideas over risks in the eyes of Bitcoin. And so I can immediately reject this proposal based off of signaling, because that's all I actually have in the end. It's trust, because I'm not going to go in there and confidently audit the code. I'm not going to just take Guy Swan's word for it or Jeremy Rubin's word for it that it works the way it says it works and it will only have the effects they say it have, because I did that before and I got burned. I did that for SegWit, and then they threw in the SegWit reweighting and increased the block size, and I didn't quite understand what that was at the time. What makes me think I'm going to quite understand fully whatever CTV is? What makes me think that somebody like me, who's been in Bitcoin almost 10 years and lives and breathes it every day, doesn't have the confidence? Why the hell should any of you? Like, it's absolutely absurd and egomaniacal to assume that you can safely and intelligently and technologically achieve consensus for a new soft fork that adds new features or increases the surface area or complexity of Bitcoin. And so I appreciate core developers when they are making optimizations and when they are fixing bugs and doing basically low-hanging fruit work and cleanup work and removing of technical debt. But I consider them enemies when they are proposing features and they are proposing, complexity for Bitcoin. So that's my thought process and how I, rationalize and process these kinds of things.
So, Francis, check template verify BIP119. What's your take on it? Should we kind of like implement it as a community, or kind of like is Bitcoin maximalism also kind of like playing away and kind of like blocking it from the consensus to kind of make it happen for good reasons or bad reasons?
I think I'm going to echo John's statements on this. I would add another dimension to CTV. First of all, we've had Taproot, and I spend a lot of time as a business owner, as the CEO of an exchange, understanding Taproot, researching Taproot. I making comments publicly about Taproot, trying to get convinced of whether or not I wanted Taproot. I was even emailed by Bitcoin core developers that were trying to explain to me the long-term benefits of Taproot for a business like BullBitcoin, which I thoroughly appreciated, by the way. Greg Maxwell sent me an email actually wondering why I was, skeptical about Taproot and trying to explain how we could benefit. So, spent a lot of time trying to figure out if this was good or bad for Bitcoin, and not for Bitcoin, for my business and for my users, but for Bitcoin generally as a Bitcoiner. We're talking about like 6 months of research, something like this. So there is an extremely high cost to getting an opinion about these things, as John said. Taproot being activated with the Speedy trial made me so incredibly nervous about the Bitcoin development process. I was furious about the way Taproot was activated, and I was extremely disappointed at my shouts against Taproot Speedy trial activation being ignored by the larger community. The danger of adding those features is that when the price of Bitcoin is low and people hold on to these hopium news that Taproot will make Bitcoin better than Ethereum. Taproot is going to increase privacy over Bitcoin and thus increase its value versus privacy coins like Monero, obsolete Monero, which is total nonsense. I mean, this is total bullshit and just false. So the Taproot upgrade was a nearly traumatic event for me. Not traumatic, but it made me cynical. Yeah, when Taproot was activated with Speedy Trial, I have some old tweets. I'm like, fuck this. I don't want to participate in Bitcoin anymore. I don't want to be part of this community. I'll just be on my exchange and fucking sell and buy Bitcoin, And like, anyway, I got over it. I was being a little bitch. I got over it. And then I, went back on Twitter. And then so Taproot is kind of like the context where, okay, so the first thing is, okay, so the SegWit weight discount, that has been nagging in the back of my mind for a while. Then Taproot got me very, very upset. There's a few people that are listening right now in the spaces that were also concerned with Taproot's Speedy trial activation. But then with the Speedy trial activation of Taproot, that became the default way for developers to activate a change that they want without having to lobby the users to generate demand, overwhelming demand for this change. And what I am terribly afraid of now is that, okay, so we have this Speedy trial activation method, but we also have other mechanisms by which developers could push this really quickly. You could think of a developer pushing for a user-activated soft fork that is kind of combined with a Speedy trial. And now we have a dynamic where I realized recently, like, fuck, miner-activated soft forks are very, very difficult to prevent from happening. And even if they are only, and there's a fallacious argument where, well, if you don't upgrade, then, that's not your problem. Who cares if you don't upgrade? Well, we're all fucking using the same unit of account, right? So if I'm on a pre-CTV blockchain and you're on a post-CTV blockchain, maybe we're using different rule sets, but we're definitely using the Bitcoin unit of account. So if something happens to the CTV Bitcoins, whatever that is, I don't know what it could be, but if something bad happens, I will be affected too. Because trust in the network, trust in the Bitcoin brand, trust in the monetary unit of account that I hold will be eroded, right? So the idea that if you don't opt in, then you're completely safe is a fallacious one. And the most optimistic development that I've seen in Bitcoin is the concept of the user-resisted soft fork, which it just brought me so much hope for Bitcoin to have this concept start to come out and arise. That is basically the opposite of a user-activated soft fork, where users will punish miners that signal for the activation of a soft fork instead of punishing miners that refuse to signal for the activation of a soft fork, because I realized that there was no cost for a miner to signal. And that is completely the antithesis of what Bitcoin is. To not have a cost to signal is not something that should be in Bitcoin. There should be a cost to signaling. Because, for example, let's say that Jeremy Rubin...
So, Francis,
yeah.
kind of like, just for the benefit of the audience, can you explain Speedy trial? Like, kind of, what's the consensus mechanism and what's your issue with it? So for anybody that doesn't know kind of what Speedy trial is, like, please explain it in simple words.
So Speedy trial is basically a soft fork activation mechanism where the premise is that everybody wants this thing. We've already determined that. And that the miners could potentially block it. So you don't want to have a soft fork being blocked by, but we don't know if the miners are maliciously going to block it. So you do kind of like a test where you say, all right, let's just do this activation method for just a few months. And if the miners decide to block that, then we'll move on to something else like a user activated soft fork. So, but the premise of that activation method is that we already have consensus and the miners could potentially want to block it. Whereas my contention is that how the fuck can you gather consensus without having a very, very long process where the users are like requesting for the change by running a specific fork of the Bitcoin Core software in an attempt to gather some support for this thing? You know, like how can you gauge consensus? And then what I've discovered is that now in the zeitgeist of the Bitcoin developers, the absence of this dissent is now considered to be consensus, right? So if there is no expert that vehemently disagrees, you know, if Peter Woolley doesn't disagree, basically, or if GMAX is on board, then it's, you know, full consensus. Let's fucking go, you know? Adam Mack is on board, there's full consensus. And that's the only reason why CTV isn't going there right now. It's not because the plebs have made their point on Twitter. It's because some of the experts don't agree. And that there is no consensus amongst the technical elite. And that is very bad because if the experts do agree, then have no fear that these changes will go through right away. So the Speedy trial is now, I believe, and that was like included in the CTV BIP as the activation method, which is very strange and it is not part of the Bitcoin Core protocol to include your activation method within the BIP. Usually that's supposed to be done separately. But anyway, so now the Bitcoin, people that believe in Bitcoin consensus, people that believe in not changing Bitcoin unless there is absolute overwhelming demand and readiness by the user base, have a tool to prevent miners and devs from colluding to activate changes quickly, which is what they did with Taproot. It was, and with Taproot, I mean, I personally know mining pool bigwigs that were talking to each other, talking to the Bitcoin Core devs over the phone in fucking private, meeting and fucking flying all over the place, literally meeting in person, negotiating the fucking activation of Taproot with the other Bitcoin mining pool operators. This was a fucking straight up collusion of devs and miners, right? It was not an organic, spontaneous phenomenon. And just because everybody liked Taproot, everybody shut the fuck up because they wanted it, right? The only difference with CTV now is that some people don't want it.
My regret during Taproot was I was busy with other shit when they were talking about all this. I tried to participate for like maybe a few days when they were talking when they're in the activation phase. But honestly, I knew absolutely nothing about Taproot, and I purely just trusted that there were some people that I trusted, some technically that I trusted that supported it. And at that time, for me, it had to be good enough because I was probably distracted with starting the company and whatever was related to work. And I just figured, hey, we're going to have to trust the boys on this one. And then I walked in during conversations, and Jeremy Rubin was trying to inject CTV activation into Taproot activation, and I was like, "Fuck my life, this guy! Like he just keeps popping up." And that's actually where it started. Me being against CTV was because he was trying to make it a topic back then during Taproot, and I already was ignorant about Taproot and thinking, "Shit, man! Like these people are just changing Bitcoin now, like." And so I just want to mention that this is why I framed my response in the abstract, because there is no such thing as a good signal. All signals are just signals, and there's no voting in Bitcoin. Like the way to make a soft fork is only going to ever be true if the people forking are the ones with all the risk. That's the way it has to be, is because you have to be willing to risk whatever the risks are to change Bitcoin and be on the wrong side to make a fork. And so there's currently no good design for that. And honestly, even with the reactive soft fork that you're mentioning, it doesn't sound that much different than a UASF for something. And UASFs are pretty fucking dangerous too, because the one mechanism that people have found that can coerce basically a soft fork is that they have found that if you create uncertainty for a miner's mining reward, then they will capitulate to what you want. But the amount of uncertainty that a miner can bear is certainly not majority node requiring. In other words, if only, I don't know, 20% of nodes start signaling uncertainty to miners, the odds are pretty high that would be enough for them all to capitulate, for them to say, okay, well then on that flag day, I'm going to start fucking supporting that thing, boys, because I don't want to lose 20% of my rewards because of some nodes that won't propagate my block for me. I don't want to take that risk. And so UASF is also very dangerous. And so all of the soft fork things are dangerous, and they're all trust-based.
Yes, they are. And possibly the most dangerous soft fork activation method is a UASF with low support pushed by Bitcoin developers that has high support from the miners, because that would activate the change via a de facto MASF. And under the branding of a UASF, and even if just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of people are actually running the UASF and it's not into Bitcoin Core, it would actually be in the network. And then if you introduce a soft fork in the network, even if it's very, very, very unpopular and very few people upgrade to this secondary repository, of course, the most dangerous is if it's actually merged into Bitcoin Core, and then, because then it's benefiting from the Bitcoin Core network effect and brand. But even if you get like 100 nodes that are running a UASF for CTV, but the miners are on board, then you're having CTV blocks. And then there's that hook that's there. CTV has its hook. And then it will just grow and grow and
All of a
grow from
sudden,
there.
it has the illusion of legitimacy, basically.
Yes,
This is
absolutely,
very,
absolutely.
very scary and dangerous, and this is why I have this default view of saying all of the soft forks are attacks, all of the changes are attacks, because they're totally indistinguishable, and the Bitcoin community is like so far from being sophisticated enough to evaluate these situations.
The thing with the user resistant soft fork is that if I believe that the CTV activation does not actually have the consensus of the users, I can choose to punish the miners by essentially forcing a fork, right? I will create a new rule that will invalidate their blocks. I am putting my skin in the game. I am taking the risk to counter the activation of the fork. That risk is exclusively on the people running that.
That's trusted too. Like, how do I know that you made this soft fork counterattack method, that you designed it properly? How do I know that it will have the results that you say it will have? Ultimately, as a non-engineer, like 99.9% of Bitcoiners, like they just have to trust you to do.
Yes, they would. Yes, they definitely would, and that's the name of the game. And that's just the way it is, right? So the way that I would see that taking shape is that a well-known Bitcoin Core developer that I personally trust would code that up. Other reviewers that I personally trust would tell me, yes, whatever Luke did, that's just not whatever Luke did is legit. And then I would vouch for these sources of expertise to the people to which I am the source of expertise. And of course, this is the best thing that can happen, is that we don't change Bitcoin and we don't have to go through this process. But there are some things that we need, or there's some things that could, maybe.
Even that is a tricky.
I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure. I'm not even
What
sure
do
we
we
do.
really need? What exactly is the problem here? Certainly not
CTV. I just play the fucking devil's advocate here, because I actually legitimately the only soft fork that I personally think is a desirable feature is CISA, cross input signature aggregation, for the reason of CoinJoin incentivizing and making CoinJoin.
See, we're getting way off into the weeds, and probably going to lose some audience because it's no longer about maximalism. But I will say, another dynamic I want to mention is time is on our side. In other words,
Correct.
there is no monster at the gate that we're trying to protect from getting inside. And
Correct.
so none of these soft forks and none of these ideas are offering that protection or claiming that we have that problem. And so we really have to frame things realistically here. And I think that because time is on our side, what I have noticed over time with Bitcoin and technology in general, with decentralized stuff, cryptography, is that over time, people find ways to do things with the limitations they have been given. And so if you want a way, in other words, you don't need CoinJoin. What you need is privacy for transacting, right? Like, in other words, let's make sure we frame the goal properly. And you don't know whether or not there are off-chain ways to get what you want yet. And so you don't need CISA. You just see it as a path to getting what you want, but you don't know that there are no other paths.
You're definitely right. What I want is privacy. What I want is not necessarily to make CoinJoin cheaper. There are other paths, and the last path is always the last ultimate path is a soft fork. Like, if you can achieve the same result with software applications, with some wallet features, with all sorts of other layers, you do that, right? So what the SegWit really is kind of like an exception, and not even, because we could have achieved Lightning Network type architectures perhaps without SegWit. It just made it incredibly easier and made it more realistic. But ultimately, even SegWit, it's like, there isn't really, just to finish on that, yes, we may not need any further change to Bitcoin. If the change that we want, we can achieve the same result with non-consensus rule changes, such as just apps. People also forget that for example, you can achieve a lot of what CTV is doing just by building apps that replicate some of CTV's features, right? So
yeah, I mean, we've had advances with DLCs. We've had advances with just using, coordinating things over networks. Like, not to shill again, but I actually do truly believe that once we get slash tags off the rails, on the rails, and bootstrap, that we're going to find some very cool ways to do transaction coordinations, and maybe even very decentralized ways to coordinate privacy related transactions. And so I think we should not, there is no rush, and we should not rush the things that are not emergencies, and we should focus on emergencies, and it should be okay if it takes 10 years to get your soft fork activated.
yes, it should. And it's just greed and impatience on behalf of the developers to want to have it right now. And I understand their motivation, because getting your stuff into Bitcoin, as I said earlier, makes you a legend, makes you, an immortal in the story of Bitcoin. So I understand it is very ego driven, I believe, especially in this case. So
I want to know where I get my sainthood for defending Bitcoin. Fuck putting things in Bitcoin.
Oh, John, I kind of believe that when we die, we will be judged on this. So after our deaths, John, we will get our sainthoods.
Well, I'll see you there, man.
Yes, you're still here. We're still here. For my own sign off, I'd like to thank everybody that was patient. It really isn't my internet. I honestly think that Twitter has started to bug the fuck out over the last month. It's very frustrating. I'm sure it was it was frustrating for some of the listeners, but I see that a lot of the listeners stayed for the whole 2 hours. So thank you guys. And thanks, John, for inviting me. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I knew going in that I was going to leave this conversation with a lot of energy and a lot of motivation to work on Bitcoin, contrary to many of the other podcasts and spaces that just drain me so much because the other people involved are so aggravating. So always pleasure to talk to you, and I'll be back on this spaces in the future because I really enjoyed this experience, and I hope everybody else did as well.
Thanks, man. It was really good catching up with you. We haven't talked in a while. We should talk more often. Guys, assuming this recording doesn't bug out, we will also post it on the YouTube and get things up there to share for later for those of you who couldn't listen to the whole thing and want to share it or listen again. And yeah, so keep an eye on Francis and his company BullBitcoin and his work, and please keep an eye on what we're doing at Synonym and the products that we're releasing. And again, thank you all for your attention and support. Good night, guys.